Season 3 starts with Gwen looking uncomfortable about going to somewhere specific, though we get Max telling them not to be worried and that they'd be fine. He'd also mentioned that they were supposed to meet up with someone there. We next see the scene from the show for where they went to Salem, with Max dressed as a judge and Gwen looking uncomfortable in an old witch costume, as Max was calling for Ben to hurry up. Like in the show, Ben states he feels like a dweeb. However, it is here that the episode changes into something new, as a kind of familiar voice then says, "You look like a dweeb." The three turn to where the voice was coming from and see a familiar silver-haired girl speaking to them as she walked over to greet them. Gwen seemed thankful to see her because of the whole magic thing, and they asked what she was doing there. It was Max that answered, telling them that they were picking her up, as he'd managed to get her sentence reduced to a few weeks in a juvie after pulling some strings, and that she'd be traveling with them the rest of the summer as part of the agreement. This means, yes, we get Charmcaster now joining the group. Charmcaster smiled and asked Gwen if she'd been practicing, to which she responded that she had, but wasn't really confident yet, as she kept screwing up most of the time. Though Charmcaster stated that was normal when learning on her own, and not to feel discouraged, though Gwen asked how Charmcaster was so calm. When asking what she meant, Gwen says that they were in Salem, to which Charmcaster begins to laugh and tells her not to believe everything she hears. This helps Gwen calm down, feeling better, and then she asks what they were supposed to do here exactly besides mess around. Charmcaster looked to Max, who nodded to her, so she then began to lead Gwen away, to teach her more of the different kinds of magics that exist, telling her not all magic is specifically witchcraft, as they did so, with Ben looking confused but then tries to sneak away to take off the dumb outfit, but Max grabs him before he could, and off they go to explore the city. While Ben was feeling embarrassed by people taking his picture, they'd heard some sort of explosion and saw that there was a building that was on fire, and so he'd activated the Omnitrix. He'd selected Stinkfly but ended up as Buzzshock, and looked annoyed but decided to just go with it, and so headed off to see what was up. We see that it was three people dressed as giant birds, each with different color, blue, orange, and green, all flying around and laughing at the trouble they were causing, though Orange immediately got zapped by some sort of electricity, and we panned down to see Buzzshock at the ready, demanding to know what they were doing exactly. The three Birdmen then got angry and tried to attack Ben, though he'd avoided their attacks by combining with a power line and then popping back out and zapping them in the back, laughing in that twisted way only a Nostinian can. And we see that Charmcaster was starting to find her way over with Gwen as people were scattering. The Birdmen were growing more annoyed and showed that they had blasters on their wrist gauntlets and started shooting at Ben, with Charmcaster sending out stone bats to distract them and telling Gwen to show her what magic she'd learned. With a nod, Gwen used the illusion spell to make two illusion copies of herself, and the three began to run around and distract the blue one as Charmcaster was handling green, and Orange was still fighting with Ben. She'd complimented her form for managing to make at least two while using a spell of her own to create a magical fire blast that charred the suit of the green bird guy and basically burned his wings off, making him drop as Max shoved a wheelbarrow prop that was full of hay over, making the guy crash into it and pass out. Ben continued with the orange guy, but they'd taken notice of what happened to Green and so tried to help the blue guy, charging towards Gwen as Ben flew forward, pushing her out of the way, as both blue and orange had tried to blast at her at the same time, getting caught in the blast instead. This caused Ben to be split in two by the lasers as he'd dropped down to the ground, hitting a big puddle of water, making him short out and sit there smoking, with Gwen calling out to Ben worriedly, seeing what happened and looking scared. She then ran over and sat beside him, looking upset, and started to cry, fearing the worst had just happened. The two bird guys were saying that's what happens when they get in the way, with Charmcaster getting mad and sending out her stone bats at them as Max walked over, putting his hand on Gwen's shoulder and kneeling down beside them as he reminds her Ben is a Nostinian right now. He then takes a plumber-grade device that looks similar to that of a taser but high-tech, and set the metal bits into the puddle and pushed the activation button, zapping the two halves of Ben in the process, which charged them up and made their eyes open up as they then quickly regrew their severed parts, making it so that there were now 2 buzz shocks instead of 1, as they sat up looking confused before they started laughing at one another. Gwen looked surprised seeing that Ben was okay as the 2 buzz shocks look at her seeing that she'd been crying, and turned to glare at the bird-themed villains before letting out a sonic sound of some sort that sounded like it was meant to be a scream of some kind, that had blown out all the nearby windows as their eyes flashed purple and they began charging up a massive attack, throwing it at the 2 of them, as they'd barely managed to move out of the way. The bird guys looked to see where buzz shock should have been, but saw that they were gone as they reappeared in a purple-colored electricity and zapped both of them in the back, causing them to cry out in pain as they were being zapped, and the packs on their back exploded, dropping the 2 onto the ground with charred skin upon their backs, as the buzz shocks then began to charge up another large electrical attack of some sort. Max and Charmcaster try to call out for Ben to stop, but there's no getting through to him as the 2 buzz shocks keep making the energy attack larger and larger still as Gwen stands up looking worried and finally manages to cry out for him to stop. This actually gets his attention as they look at Gwen, seeing her standing there watching him with that look of fear of what they might do, causing their eyes to flash green, then back to purple, then green again, flickering through the 2 colors faster and faster until they finally stay green, and the 2 stop charging the attack, letting it slowly shrink and dissipate as they recombined and slowly floated down towards where Gwen was, and went to reach out for her as she took a step back. Using the extended arm to hit the Omnitrix symbol, he'd force-changed himself back into his human form, and spoke softly as he'd said her name, looking concerned, trying to get Gwen to look at him. Hearing his human voice again, Gwen looked up, seeing Ben there in front of her. She cried and threw herself around him, glad to see that he was okay and back to being him again.